Being Black in America comes with its challenges. However, we understand that enlightenment through education is the oppressor's worst fear. By bridging the gap between academia and the people, our purpose is to equip you with knowledge that breaks down barriers during your journey towards truth and freedom. Welcome to the Black and Highly Dangerous Podcast.
Yo, Daph, what's going on? What's going on?
Nothing much, just chilling, getting some much needed rest. So that's pretty good. Also that's preparing good. to hear these results for the midterms. We're recording this a little bit early, so I don't know yet.
Yes, we don't know. Anxiety is building up, I'm feeling good about it. Just because of the numbers and the people doing early voting and the support, like it really does feel like a presidential election. So
it does. I'm scared though. So me and John, we're not even going to watch the coverage. We are going to be in Chicago. We're going to be at Hamilton. We're going to see Hamilton on Tuesday night. And so we'll just figure it out after.
Enjoy the show, don't check your phones, keep them off. And just, I guess, right after the show, I know what y'all gonna do. They're gonna look at them phones real quick.
Yeah. So it's just kind of like we want something to be nice and beautiful about that day, just in case. Because after 2016, I just stay cautiously optimistic.
Yeah. Well, it was a little depressing. I ain't gonna lie. The vibes after that one, but I just feel like everybody's like, okay, we gotta get this guy out of here. We gotta stop him. So, and historically it's shown, more people will turn out, just the better it goes for Democrats.
For Democrats, that is true. That is true.
So all these numbers I'm seeing seems like a good sign.
Yeah. What's up with you, though?
Nothing much. It's been crazy busy per usual, doing this search, teaching classes, doing the search, man. Like I said last time, this stuff is like, it's a lot. And I don't know the next time I'll be leading another search, but this will be it for a while.
That's funny. So, how did you volunteer for that? Did you get selected? Did you?
Yeah, they pretty much, it was like I was going to be on the committee anyway, but because the position is I'm the director of the concentration. And so we're hiring, somebody to be working with me. So I guess they just was like,
it makes sense.
You're going to be the chair. And I was like, okay. But so like the application stuff isn't what is, most difficult about it. It's just like now when you're starting to get those on-campus interviews, you got to like help plan the logistics of everything, you know what I'm saying? And making sure everybody can meet, getting the questions ready. You got to do all the paperwork on this side, getting the dean, make sure they can meet the department head. And it's like all of that stuff is like, man, that's a lot.
Yeah. Shout out to all the people that make the logistics happen, including Utah. Seems like a lot of work.
Yeah, it's a lot of work. And that's funny because like it's things you don't think about. Like when you're on the market, you know what I'm saying? You're just like, oh, I got to get ready for this interview. I got to nail it. But now when you're on the other side, it's like, all right, we got to make sure everything is ready. Everything's prepared. So everything goes smoothly for the candidate, because you want them to have a good impression too. And not be like a little sloppy mess. Otherwise they won't work with you.
Crazy.
But all right, we got some, since we didn't have no Oh Lord news for our last week, we got some Oh Lord news this week.
We do, definitely.
Let's check it out. Hello, and welcome to BHD News, where we give you the most current and eye-opening Oh Lord news of the week. Join us as we present news that'll make you want to say,
Okay, so this first story is a little wacky, and it happened in Scotland, but it's possible that something like this could happen in the U.S. So this is just a warning. So a man locked himself alone in a room with a bulldog and covered his genital area with peanut butter. And A few hours later, he was discovered unconscious in his room in a pool of his own blood, and the dog had eaten his
Oh my goodness.
penis and testicles.
What the heck? Yo, that's a wild story.
Yeah, it's pretty wild, but I mean, I don't know. People are into some crazy things. Like, y'all, be careful out here if you're into some crazy things.
I have no words for the story. I have no words.
Is it worse than our very first Oh Lord news story when the cop got caught sucking toes? Do you remember that? They're up there. This one might be worse because this is just crazy. Like, this dog down there killed you. Down there killed you, man. Because you want to do something like that. All his clothes was on, but the only thing that was uncovered was, that, and it had peanut butter on it. Like, why? Why would you do that?
Okay, that one sells itself.
Okay. In less crazy news, but more upsetting, I don't know if you remember, in 2016, there was a Black woman doctor on board Delta Airlines. They had called overhead. They needed a doctor. And when she, came to the rescue, they were like, are you really a doctor? And they doubted her, and, they didn't allow her to help. Well, supposedly they had put some new protocols in place that would prevent that type of embarrassment for them, because the woman, of course, was a doctor, but clearly they have not learned from their mistake. On the flight last week, Dr. Fatima Cody Stanford, who, works at Mass General Hospital and is also a medical school instructor at Harvard Medical School, was on a Delta Airlines flight when the person next to her, went into distress. She began to try to help them. And so when a flight attendant came over, they asked her, was she a doctor? She said that because she's accustomed to people just doubting her, she doesn't look like a doctor as a Black woman. She always carries like her wallet size medical license. So when she presented it to the flight attendant was like, is this real? Are you really a doctor? And that the flight attendant was like, are you a head doctor? And it's just kind of like, this patient is in distress and you're doing that. She said the flight attendant went away, and then a second flight attendant came over, asked to see the license, and again was like, are you a doctor? And they just went on, and she's like, why are you questioning this? Why would I carry somebody else's? Because they asked, was it hers? She's like, why would I carry anybody else's medical license with me? So, y'all don't let y'all racism get y'all killed on airplanes and stuff. You don't
let somebody die because you don't trust their credentials, man. She didn't even have to do all that, but she showed the license, and that should be it. That should be it.
And the fact that she seems like a very reasonable person. She's like, I understand that because of the images you might see in the media when it comes to doctors, that you might not associate a Black woman as a doctor. Therefore, I carry my credentials just to put people at ease. And then they doubt the credentials.
Oh, yeah, somebody gonna be walking around with a fake doctor's ID. Like, for what? That don't even make no sense, man. Like, that's crazy. That's a crazy assumption to even believe that. Like, just let it be, man. That's crazy.
Yeah. Delta tried to say, like, oh, it's one of our our other carriers. It's not Delta. We'll make sure they're trained. Nah.
Oh, my goodness. No, they work for you. That's your company. That's your name. Take responsibility.
Yes. Okay. In other wild news, did you hear that some white right-wing activists tried to frame Mueller for sexual assault?
No, I missed this one.
Yes. So they actually they looked up women who had worked with him in the past, like at a law firm. And they, contacted them by email, contacted them by phone. And, they asked them to speak on like some like secure application. And in the secure application, I think it's called Signal. In this secure application, they propositioned some of these women to pay off their credit card debt and give them $20,000 if they would come forward and say that Mueller had sexually assaulted or harassed them.
Wow.
And the lady who brought it to the news was like, it was really scary because the guy offered to pay off the credit card debt and told her exactly how much debt she had.
That's crazy.
Yeah.
They go on two extremes to get this, to set somebody up.
Mm-hmm. And it even went a little bit further because one of the people, his name is like Wall or something. His last name is Wall. He posted a picture and was like, I'm coming forward with one of the victims of Mueller. And he blanked out her face, but he was so stupid that he didn't realize that, like, just because he blanked out his face, he didn't blank out anything else. And the picture had previously been posted online. And the woman whose face he blanked out was his girlfriend. He had posted the picture in the past.
Goodness, come on. Yo, come on. Oh, that's too easy. That's too easy.
Too easy. So, it's just crazy. People are like scared. They're trying to discredit people, and it's scary.
Yeah, it's getting wild out here.
Yeah.
I don't know.
Bombs, false accusations.
Yeah, bombs getting sent to people, shooting up synagogues, man, places of worship, accusations, man, like Trump trying to get rid of the 14th Amendment. Like, what is going on, man?
We are in wild times for sure.
I really pray for some positive news on Tuesday. Just like, just give us something, man. Yeah. Give us something. Give us some peace of mind.
And in our final Oh Lord news segment, which relates to today's topic and with people losing their minds and just being out there in the world, there seems to be trouble in Black GOP paradise. Kanye is backtracking. Candace Owens is getting in Twitter wars with Tommy Loren. I don't know if you know who that is. And it's just a mess in Black GOP land.
I know they're shaking in their boots now because midterms a few days away.
Yo, it's crazy. But what do you think of Kanye backtracking, saying he wants to get out of politics? His eyes are wide open. He sees that he's been used.
That's a major side eye, multiple side eyes.
Yes.
I was using the emojis.
That's funny. I actually read that some of it, or that it might not necessarily be genuine, but that Kanye has, people have been putting their money where their mouth is, and they haven't been supporting him. I think his last album, Ye or something like that, it didn't sell as many copies as you would expect for somebody.
That's why he's coming out with another one. It's supposed to be this month in November.
Yandi or something like that. Yeah, it's supposed to come out on the 23rd. He's supposed to have like I don't know if it's Adidas, but it's some type of sneaker deal. And so people are worried about money. He has become such a polarizing figure. And the thing is, although these Republicans are boosting him up, they aren't listening to his music and they aren't going to buy his clothes.
Nope.
It's the people that he's alienated that, would normally support him financially. And
I streamed not one of his songs on his last album. You know what I'm saying? I did no downloads, not support this man, not at all. Usually when new music come out, I'll stream it, listen to it. But I'm like, nah, I ain't giving you a penny, not a listen. And I've heard that because he recently also, I think it was like the day before or the day after or whatever, because he released his shoes and the Yeezys, and they did poorly. He just released a shoe or whatever, a style of shoe, and it was actually like a lot of the people, I even saw tweets about it, like a lot of people were shocked because it was actually available. Because every time he releases his shoe, it's always been sold out immediately, and people were like, I can literally just go to the Adidas website right now and purchase them. And it's like never happened before. So that's also a sign that people ain't buying his shoes like they once was.
Yeah. Because I could have sworn, like you said, that Yeezys were a thing and people,
And so that they were still available. So everybody's like, uh-oh. So now he comes out with this whole apology. Oh, his album ain't selling like he used to. His shoes ain't selling like they used to. Yeah, man. We tried to tell you, bro, like you messing up, but you keep wearing that MAGA hat and you keep feeling like Superman.
Actually, to quote Kanye, don't ever fix your lips like collagen and say something where you might end up apologizing.
See, maybe listen to your own words, man.
Yo, I tell you, Ty, I am somebody that like knew every damn Kanye lyric. And like you said, this is so serious to me. Like you said, I haven't streamed nothing. I haven't even streamed the old stuff that I love, but I'm just like, I don't have time for you. And also, you're not going to use me for a come up again. You can't just, offer a fake apology and think that that's going to, solve
no more words with Kanye
on my end.
It has to be nothing but actions from this point. But yeah, I mean, just to end the Kanye thing, like I think it's just all about no more about words, just action now. We need to see some stuff, buddy. You can't just write a tweet and be like, sorry, and then think you about to get everybody's support, man, and you trying to come back over like I was manipulated, I was used. No, you weren't.
No,
because all your buddies, all your famous buddies sat down with you, tried to explain, tried to give you a second chance, and you came right back out with the MAGA hut, telling Trump you love him, giving him hugs. So
you give me superpowers, Trump.
Well, tell Trump to buy some of them shoes then, buddy. Buy some of them Yeezys.
Yo.
Oh, man.
That's wild. Okay, so on today's episode, we're actually going to be talking about Black conservatives. We'll be interviewing the author of a book called Black Elephants in the Room, The Unexpected Politics of African American Republics. I said Republicans. His name is Professor or Dr. Corey D. Fields, and his work is awesome.
Yeah, no, this was great. We think this was we didn't actually plan it like this to have it come out around this time, but it's no better time to have this discussion because, of course, this episode will come out right after midterm elections. And there's not much things we talk about when we talk about Black Republicans. I mean, we all see all the celebrities, taking part in it, like Kanye and others. But now we're trying to, with this conversation, we're actually getting into the nitty gritty, like who are Black Republicans and why do they choose to be Black Republicans? And, just providing some context to this particular group of folk outside of the celebrities that we see. Let's, have more conversation about who actually make them up and differences between them. And there were some interesting things I learned about it, because like many of you, and I'm sure you'll figure out in this interview, myself, we kind of have the one stereotype of once we see somebody that's a Black Republican, you get the eye roll and, and we call them the Uncle Toms and we can't trust them and they're not really Black and all this stuff. So all of that stuff is definitely addressed in this interview with Dr. Fields and his research.
Yeah. And it's funny because I'm on Amazon right now looking at the book. There are only 2 left in stock. So after this interview, those 2 are probably going to be gone because it's a really good book.
Sell out. Buy the books, sell them out. That's funny. So check it out. Check out the interview. I think, it's an interesting topic and I learned a lot. And it's something that I probably want to talk about further in the future as well. And even his future research agenda, which we addressed in the interview too, is pretty interesting and compelling too. Yeah. But without further ado, you ready to get into it, Dad?
I am.
All right, we'll catch up with y'all afterwards.
What image comes to mind when you think of Black Republicans? Most often, people envision Black Republicans as the sellout, the Uncle Tom, or even Kanye West in a MAGA hat. Today, we complicate those images by interviewing Dr. Corey D. Fields, an associate professor of sociology at Georgetown University and author of Black Elephants in the Room, The Unexpected Politics of African American Republicans. His 2016 book explores the dynamic relationship between race and political behavior in the United States. In the interview, we discussed the book, myths and misconceptions about Black Republicans, and the potential for a Black wave in the Republican Party. Welcome, Dr. Fields.
Thanks for having me on, guys. I really appreciate it.
Thanks for being part of this.
Yeah, we are really excited about this conversation, especially given the recent events that have happened in DC around Black Republicans. It just so happened that event happened, but we did not reach out to you because of that event. It just kind of happened like that. So we're kind of
serendipitous, right? The universe is aligning to set this conversation off. No, I definitely figured the timing was great to be taping this after all the stuff with Talking Points USA and Candace and the new clothing line I heard about. It's a lot. It's a lot.
Okay, before we get into all of that, which, like you said, is a lot, we want to know a little bit more about you, your work, and like what led you to academia and this particular topic.
So let's see, a little bit about me. So as you said in the intro, I am an associate professor in the sociology department at Georgetown University. This is the start of my second year there. So before that, I was an assistant professor at Stanford. And before that, I was in grad school at Northwestern University in the sociology department. So, I guess I had a little bit of a untraditional pathway in academia. I mean, it's not that untraditional. I mean, I didn't go to grad school immediately after undergrad. So I worked for like 6 years in the private sector, in advertising, actually. So I worked for 6 years in advertising, and a lot of that work actually involved sort of consumer research, brand strategy kind of work. Which in a lot of ways was very sort of sociological, right? It involved doing a lot of independent research. And I got really interested in this idea of, studying people just for studying sake. But the trick in the private sector is you only got to study stuff as long as someone else was willing to pay for it. So I would often find myself, engaged in topics, but not really able to sort of direct the nature of the research or the length of it or the depth of it. And so I started to think about, I guess I'd probably been about 4 or 5 years in the job at that point, and started to think about what were avenues where I could sort of research the stuff I wanted to research on my own terms, on my own time kind of deal. And academia was, was the end where I ended up. I thought about maybe going into consultancy, opening up a consulting company, independent consultancy, but I ended up in academia. And why sociology? I guess this is just one of those full honesty podcasts, and points to the power of serendipity in life. So I was considering social policy programs as well as sociology programs, and it just so happened that the professors that I contacted from my undergrad program, the ones who got back to me were sociology professors. So if my social policy prof had gotten back to me sooner, this conversation might be looking very different. So I went into sociology, went back to Northwestern for grad school. I was also there for undergrad. And here we are today. I guess, how did I end up doing the Black Elephants book? In grad school, developed a pretty strong interest in culture, identity, specifically thinking through, sort of how who we are shapes what we do. And as part of that, I got interested in sort of people doing unexpected stuff, right? So people engaged in activities you wouldn't expect people like them to do, partly because of, or mostly because of an interest in sort of how we socially construct people like me or people like them, right? And so out of this interest in unexpectedness, I started thinking about, what are some groups of people who are unexpected? And Black Republicans came up. So I didn't come to the project out of a deep sort of unabiding interest in politics or political behavior or political actors. That more developed over the course of doing the project. And so in some ways, I think, it was nice that I came to it kind of backwards, right? Like I didn't come to it because I was interested in politics or had a particular sort of partisan agenda in terms of like writing a fluff piece about Black Republicans or a hatchet job about Black Republicans, right? For me, Black Republicans were just this really interesting case of unexpected people. So Yeah, so I mean, that's a little bit of backstory on the project.
No, that's cool. And when you said you were in advertising, and stuff like that, and the overlap with sociology, I find that to be so true. Because every time, like sometimes when I have time and space to do some leisure reading, even like last spring, I always find myself enjoying books dealing with like marketing and advertising. I think one book I read recently or last spring was like Start With Why. And just like the little stories and anecdotes they give in there about how marketing works and the not the social service, but the sociological elements of consumerism and trying to figure out, even the social psychology of people and how to target particular markets. I just always found that pretty fascinating. So yeah, I'm not surprised to talk about the overlap with both of those for sure.
Yeah, definitely. I mean, one thing I was struck by, when I initially started grad school, and still to this day, because I have friends, who I knew from when I worked in advertising that I'm still friends with, is actually the overlap in terms of the kind of topics people are interested in, the kind of methods and techniques people use to do research. There are, a lot of the tools, both qualitative and quantitative, actually, that social scientists use, not just sociologists, but certainly sociologists use, are also being deployed by people in advertising and marketing. Actually, a lot of the people I used to work with had PhDs. Like, it was not uncommon for people to have PhDs or to be AVD and then working in market research and advertising. So it always struck me as like this really sort of pleasant surprise in some ways, because it was kind of like, oh, okay, in some ways, academia wasn't as alien to me as I was expecting it to be because of my experiences previously working. But it's definitely the case that, people on both sides of the private sector and academia in some ways have some really sort of misconceptions about what the other side does. And so that was always kind of humorous, because I felt like you all are kind of the same folks, but y'all think y'all are real different, but it's not that different.
Yeah, that's funny. That's funny. So yeah, speaking about like, methodologies and research focus, just tell us a little bit of how you gain access to this population of Black Republicans for your book.
Yeah, that was actually one of the big challenges of the book, or the project overall, was getting access, actually like finding people to talk to. So when I initially conceived of the project, and this was my dissertation research, right, that I ended up turning into a book. So when I initially conceived of the project, I was in grad school, and I had sort of envisioned, I was going to do, I was going to find a random nationally representative sample of Black Republicans, and I was going to interview them. And, I had these sort of like big ambitious plans that kind of sort of started to break down once I, sort of got to thinking about how, rare this population actually is, right? And what's the likelihood of, as a unfunded graduate student, or at least I didn't have like a grant or anything to cover my dissertation research, do this sort of large scale, random, nationally representative survey. So what I ended up doing was building the study around looking at activists, right? So political activists, either people who hand raise as being activists for Republican politics, or sometimes people were, I'm engaged in Black politics, and I just happen to be Republican, right? So it ended up being the study of political activists. And I wanted to look at sort of the importance of political context to the experiences of Black Republicans. So it ended up, I talked to people in a red state, a blue state, and a swing state. So the focus isn't so much on, why are Black people Republican, right? Like, in a lot of times the conversations around Black Republicans do kind of focus on, what I think about is like the intake question, right? Like, why aren't more people Black Republicans, or how can anyone be a Black Republican, right? So my work is built around instead shifting the focus a little bit, right? And shifting from this, like, why aren't more Black people Republican, instead to looking at what's it like to be Black and Republican, right? So what I wanted to do was get a sense of the experience of what's it like to be Black and in the Republican Party, or identify as a Republican. Because one of the things I learned is that, the extent to which Black Republicans consider themselves, quote unquote, in the Republican Party isn't consistent and in fact varies pretty significantly. So, right. So, yeah, so I pretty much structured the project, like I said, around this question of what's it like to be Black and Republican, and then looking at, how does that experience vary depending on the political context in which you're doing it?
That's very interesting and important. I know a lot of people are probably focused right now, like you said, on the first question of like, how could you, or, how can we get more, instead of like, what is that experience like? And like seeing some of the lives from like the leadership conference, the Republican leadership conference Turning Point this past weekend, I really was like, what is it like to be there and be in that room? So,
Right. And in some ways, I think, the looking at the what's it like question actually does provide some insight into, why don't more people do it, right? Like that wasn't necessarily the goal of the research, but I do think for me coming out of it and having a sense of what it's like to be Black and Republican kind of illustrates why more people don't do it. Right? So, the book certainly isn't written as a how-to guide, like how to get more Black people into the Republican Party or how to keep Black people out of it. But I do feel like, hearing the stories of Black Republicans, you start to get a sense of why, this is a path less traveled, so to speak, right? And it's, complicated. I guess it's in some ways complicated, in some ways not complicated. But yeah, so I definitely think, by looking at the experiences of Black Republicans, you kind of come to understand maybe, why the numbers look the way they do. And I do think, in some ways, I gathered this data, before, like pre-Trump, right? But I do think some of the insights from it, the broader insights, actually help explain in some ways why we're sort of seeing, the kinds of Black Republicans who have emerged on the scene in the Trump era, right? It's sort of a new face of Black Republicans, if you will. And that's been really interesting in some ways to sort of see. It's, especially it's like when you're not in the field, so it's like you kind of see it with these sort of fresh outsider eyes. But it's definitely, I feel like, consistent with some of the stories I saw when I was, talking to Black Republican activists, sort of why people like Candace Owens and Diamond and Silk and I guess Kanye West, right, have sort of emerged as the face of what it means to be Black and Republican.
Yeah, we're going to get in. We're definitely going to get into that. But before we I guess get too far into what is that experience like now, and when you were collecting data, I do want to provide the audience with a little bit of context about Black Americans' history with the Republican Party and the migration to the Democratic Party, because I know recent Republican activists, Black activists, have really kind of relied on that history to try to motivate Black people to join, to say this was the party of Lincoln, this was the party of freedom. We were, all or mostly Republicans at one point. And so can you provide a little context for our listeners, especially since that is a key talking point now among recent Republican activists?
Yeah, I can definitely talk about that a little bit. And I should sort of say, for me, I was not necessarily focused on giving a historical count per se. And definitely, Leah Wright Ricure and Joshua Farrington both have awesome historical accounts of Blacks in the Republican Party. But for me, I was interested in contemporary stuff. But to understand the contemporary Black Republicans, it actually does help to have a little bit of this history, right? And so, at the start of the Republican Party, right, Black people were sort of central to the founding of the party and issues relating to Black people more directly, right, were central to the origins of the Republican Party. And for, a very long time, the majority of Blacks were identified and voting for voting for Republicans, right? The Republican Party was sort of the party, this sort of party of Lincoln that gets trotted out these tropes, right? There is certainly, lines up historically. What I was interested in was sort of this issue of when being Black and Republican sort of became unexpected, right? So, because actually people talk about like the sort of total shift of like when, Blacks start leaving the Republican Party in the like 1930s, right? Like around the New Deal, right? And so you have, you're no longer getting the majority of Black people voting for Republican presidential candidates, say, for example. And it's probably worth noting that, the rarity of Blacks supporting Republicans is pretty much, at national politics level. Things get a little more complicated when it comes to like local and state politics. But it's fair to say that, the majority of Black people haven't been voting for Republicans, like as a presidential candidate, since the 1930s, right? But it wasn't until like 1964 or so that the idea of a Black person being a Republican sort of took on this impression of oddity. I guess that's a fair way to describe it, right? Because it's interesting to think about, right? For a long time, even when Blacks weren't, throwing the majority of their support behind the Republican Party, plenty of Black people were voting for Republicans, right? So, where you see numbers now where, 10 or less % of Blacks voting for Republican presidential candidates, that's a post-1960s thing, right? There was a long period, between, say, the 1930s and the 1960s where the majority of Blacks weren't voting for the Republican Party, but plenty of Blacks were, right? And it wasn't perceived as, like, this sort of crazy thing that needs to be called out. Like, that's a fairly, that doesn't emerge until, say, like the Goldwater election, right? And the Republican Party's perceived and actual antithesis or antagonism with the Civil Rights Act, right? And so that's the point at which, the interests of Black people and the interests of the Republican Party are positioned as, antithetical to one another.
Oh, no, that makes a lot of sense. I think, when we look at kind of even what you're getting to post-1964, I guess, overall views and opinions of Black Republicans, and, even today, I think a lot of it, of course, has to do with media and, what outlets put certain faces out there to say and support certain narratives. And then, being from myself and other, inner circles and people around me, how upset people get when they hear certain things from people on some of these conservative networks and things of that nature, especially when it's coming from people in the Black community. It can be really upsetting a lot. But, right, I think there's a lot to it. We're just taking kind of maybe the tip of the iceberg, right, of who makes up the Black Republicans, and then overgeneralizing to some extent, right? I think that is partially the truth because of what we see and not really understanding the nuance of what may be involved within the Black Republicans, period. So based on your research, what do you think, or what did you find, or what are some of the major myths and misconceptions about Black Republicans from what you've seen?
Yeah, so I mean, I think what you said makes a lot of sense, and certainly hews pretty closely to the account I give in the book, right? And so, and part of what I want to say is in the book, what I was trying to do is sort of examine how people link, racial identity and partisanship, right? Like, how do people make Black and Republican go together? And how do these Black Republican activists do that work, right? So I sort of argue that, identity politics, or like linking a social identity like race with a kind of politics like Republicanism, is a social achievement, right? Like, it's not sort of a given that Blacks have to be anything, right? Like, it takes work to make that happen. And what's interesting about Black Republicans is because it's so rare, the work is more obvious, right? The work of linking Blackness and Republicanness is more transparent in some ways. And what was striking to me was that, there are multiple ways to do that, to make Black and Republican go together. But there were sort of two strategies. One, in the book I call sort of race blind, and the other I call race conscious. And what's interesting is, like, for race blind, so there's this idea that all Black Republicans aren't the same, right? Which, seems like in some ways a rudimentary kind of insight, but I do think is an important one because it's sort of inconsistent with the public perception of Black Republicans. And so I guess what I was most struck by probably was the infighting among Black Republicans, and then the fighting between Black Republicans and their white Republican counterparts. And so I can talk a little bit about both those things because they're, related to one another and also related to our sort of the image that we get of Black Republicans. So there are two kinds of Black Republicans, which the one group I call race blind. These are essentially, generally what we think of when we think of Black Republicans, right? Like, their story is sort of like race doesn't matter, right? Black people need to stop talking about racial injustice and racial inequality and sort of focus on personal failings or like community failings and get right sort of with ourselves, right? And the Republican Party becomes the best way to do that because the Republican Party is not about identity politics, and the Republican Party doesn't want to talk about race, right? And, and so these are sort of, race doesn't matter Black Republicans, right? And generally, when we think about, which Black Republicans end up in the spotlight, they kind of articulate a variant of this message, right? It's not that actual message itself. And you can contrast that approach, this sort of race blind approach, with a race conscious approach where, Blackness is centered in the politics, right? For these race conscious Black Republicans. For them, they, talk about, their politics is a Black politics, right? And what they want, it's just sort of like they think the best thing for Black people is conservative social policy, right? That sort of supports businesses and families and curtails the role of the state because the state gets coded as white, right? And the best thing for Black people is less white involvement in their lives. And so you can think about the race-conscious Black Republicans as sort of articulating a Black power through conservative principles kind of message, right? And so you have these two competing approaches of linking Blackness and Republicanness, the sort of, race blind, saying race doesn't matter, race conscious, saying Black power through conservative principles. And what happens is, when Fox News, say, needs a Black Republican on TV, they call the guy who says race doesn't matter, not the guy who says Black power through conservative principles, right? And part of that, I think, has to do with, the role that sort of white Republicans have identified for Black Republicans within the party.
That is so fascinating, and it clearly shows that your work moves beyond kind of like Black Republicans or Uncle Tom's, like, that trope, which seems like overly simplistic based on your analyses. But it just goes to show that the media is very vested in, putting certain images of Black Republicans forward.
Certainly, yeah, and I think it's, certainly overly simplistic to be like, oh, all Black Republicans are Uncle Toms, especially if you think about, like the Uncle Tom. Like, so this is this idea that Black Republicans are somehow less Black than their, non-Republican counterparts, right? Like Black people who aren't Republicans. And that was definitely inconsistent with what I found. I mean, the Black Republicans I talked to, sort of articulated a sense of linked fate, like they felt connected to other Black people. They were certainly, lived in Black neighborhoods, went to Black churches. For most, I would say there was this like articulation of like culturally Black, but not politically Black in some way. Well, right. So it was like, it was important to go to be in Black communities and engaged in Black cultural institutions, and they wanted their kids to go to integrated schools, right? Like the goal wasn't necessarily to, be in white spaces or just to be only around white people, right? It's just that the difference was for some Black Republicans, right, specifically for those race-blind Black Republicans, there was this sense that my Blackness doesn't have to define my politics, right? And so I think to the extent that, you know, it's a broad definition of like what makes someone an Uncle Tom, right? But like if you're saying that, you know, it's less Black to decenter Blackness in your politics, then for race-blind Black Republicans, it would be fair to call them less Black, right? Now, I think the interesting dynamic here is why is it that we only hear about Black Republicans who are articulating a message of, you know, race blindness or color blindness or sort of saying race doesn't matter, right? So another way to think about the difference between these sort of race conscious and race blind Black Republicans is the race conscious Black Republicans, those Black Republicans who say, you know, the best thing for Black people is conservative social policy because that's going to uplift Black communities, right? What they see their goal as, these activists, is changing the GOP, changing the Republican Party, right? Making the Republican Party more hospitable to Black interests. Whereas the colorblind, the race-blind Black Republicans, right, those who are saying race doesn't matter, they see their goal as changing Black people, right? Like trying to make Black people more conservative, right? Make Black people embrace the Republican Party as it stands. And so, you know, with this sort of these two different approaches, right, it makes it difficult for them to work, those two groups of Black Republicans to work together, right, for one. But it also means that, you know, the race-blind folks are going to have much more easy and positive relationships with white Republicans, right? And so, you know, it's going to be much easier for them to build alliances and networks and connections to resources and attention and platforms with white Republicans. And the thing is, the only way we hear about a Black Republican is through white Republicans, right? Like our channels for, you know, access and attention, right, are for Black Republicans, they're granted by white Republican gatekeepers, right? So on some level, you kind of have to, you know, pass through those filters, right? You have to pass through the filters of white Republican gatekeepers before you can get opportunities as a Black Republican. So that's, you know, in some ways, I'm sorry, go ahead.
No, you finish.
Well, I was going to say, and so, you know, linking back to your point about, you know, why, you know, the sort of media sort of focuses on certain kinds of Black Republicans, like that's partly why, right? Like, because the ones we hear about are ones who talk about Blackness and Republican partisanship in ways that sit comfortably with sort of the impressions and the beliefs and the interest, right, of white Republican gatekeepers.
So you kind of no, you go, because you're on a roll.
I know. I'm trying to make it more of a conversation, but like one of the, and you asked about access earlier, right? And so that sort of point, what was really fascinating, as hard as it was to find Black Republicans, a real challenge of the project was actually getting white Republicans to talk about Black Republicans in the party, right? And so, you know, I went to a lot of conferences and, like, you know, things like this Talking Points event, right? Like, I went to a lot of those for a while. And, you know, whenever Black Republicans were often eager to talk, right? Like, they sort of wanted to get their stories out there. They wanted to be heard. But whenever I would try to talk to white Republicans, like once they found out what I was doing, right, it was, you know, kind of iced out. Like that was not uncommon. And getting any to go on the record was incredibly difficult. So, right. So, and I think partly that is because there is, you know, the role that Black Republicans play within the party, right, is not necessarily sort of clearly articulated. But I think there is, you know, a sense within the party that, you know, who are they there for? Are they there to get more Black people engaged in Republican politics, or are they there to make white Republicans, feel comfortable about the racial messaging that comes out of the party?
That's really good. I was wondering, because, you talk a lot about race, but I was wondering, were there any interesting gender dynamics that you uncovered in your study?
Yeah, so overwhelmingly, the activists I talked to were men. And so, and to be fair, it was a convenient sample of activists, right? It sort of built up through snowball. Like I talked to someone and then have them tell me who else I should talk to. So it's probably biased in that way. But it was definitely the gender aspect of this is that, it's a universe of Black men engaged in this politics, right? Black men who are hashing this out. And in some ways, the most interesting gender dynamic to me was when Black Republicans talk about the problems that Black people face, right? Like those problems tend to get gendered, right? Like, so when Black Republicans talk about Black people generically, right? Like they're talking about Black men. They're talking about the problems that Black men face. And in that regard, it was sort of striking the extent to which Black problems got coded as male problems in the context of Black Republican activism. So in some ways, right, there is a gender story there. Given the data I have and the way I collected it, I'm not necessarily positioned to say, are men more likely to do this than women? I looked at some survey data that does suggest that that's the case. But I think there's a parallel gender story among Black Republican activists that is like the problems of Black America get gendered as the problems of Black men. And I think that definitely has consequences, both for how Black Republicans articulate, Black interests, but also for how they link those interests to Republican partisanship. And then furthermore, how the Republican Party then gets to use Black Republican activists. So in some ways, actually, I think it's kind of interesting right now that, a lot of the faces of Black Republicanism in 2018, right, are actually women. So that in some ways is interesting and kind of runs a little bit counter to what I would have expected.
Yeah, and I think too, going along those lines, just even kind of going through the traditional race, class, and gender, I do want to touch on the class portion a little bit, because from me, or my perspective, I feel like maybe class might be somewhat of a predictor to involvement potentially with the Republican Party as far as Blacks. I mean, of course, we'll probably talk about some of the Black celebrities and people with money who may go towards that. But I remember from a narrative in your book from Antidote where I think it was a Black guy who was raised around, of course, his Black family, but also raised in a family that was pretty much voted for Democrats and were liberals. But then I think when he got his own business, a small business, started to pay attention to things like tax policies and stuff like that and overreaching the government. And then that's when he became involved in the government. So I'm thinking access to certain privileges, whether to do with class, whether to do with business, does that play a role as far as their involvement with the conservative party?
Yeah, so I mean, I'll tread lightly here because, right, so the people I talk to, like I said, not like a random sample and certainly probably not representative of all Black Republicans, right? Like these are people, I mean, so essentially everyone I talked to was middle class or upper middle class, right, at the time that I talked to them. So these are people, mostly college educated who had free time to be engaged in politics as essentially like a hobby, So these are sort of middle class folks for sure. And they definitely would often, sort of link their Republican, they sort of fold their Republican partisanship into this narrative of like, once was blind, but now I see, right? And it's sort of like, I didn't know any better, but then I sort of, had my own experiences with sort of taxes, or I tried to run my own business, right? And this was definitely, this sort of once was blind, but now I see narrative was definitely more prominent among the race-blind Black Republicans, right? But the survey data, the question is actually a little more murky, right? Like there isn't necessarily this linear relationship between class and Republican partisanship, right? Where it's like people who make more money are more likely to be Republican. Unlike when you look at surveys of white people where that is the case, it's less clear with African Americans. I've seen some studies that show that, the richest Blacks are more likely to be Republican and the poorest Blacks are more likely to be Democrats, but that's sort of the tail end of the income distribution. But in the middle, income isn't a good predictor of which Blacks are more likely to be Republican. And some of the analysis I did of some survey data is pretty consistent with that, where like income wasn't a great predictor of which Blacks were more likely to be Republican. And in fact, things like education, the more education you had, the more likely you were to be liberal for African Americans. Mm. So the class story actually doesn't sort of hew as tightly as we sort of think it is. Now, now I'm just wildly speculating. So, apply the podcast musing filter to this. But I think in some ways it might be sort of strongly correlated with like projected class aspirations, right? So like, the folks who sort of talk about, wanting to do super big things and make a lot of money and, be big business owners or whatever in Black communities might lean towards Republicanism or be sympathetic towards some Republican policies. But the, sort of this where I want to be versus where I am dichotomy might be coming into play a little bit. So I guess that's a really long-winded way of saying, I think, the gender story, definitely, the Black Republicanism, is male in a lot of ways, both in terms of the people who do it, but also in terms of, the rhetoric around it. But I don't necessarily think it's, as class. Like, I don't think this is as sort of like an upper class thing. Like, it's not just upper class Blacks who are doing this.
That's really interesting. And it also makes me think about not just Black Republicans, but also white Republicans that are poor. Mm-hmm. And, just thinking about how it seems somewhat contradictory when you consider your current class station. And this is me passing judgment. Yes, it is. But, it seems like you're voting against your own best interests. I know you have aspirations, but, maybe until then, like... voting your best interest.
Right. So this actually, I totally hear what you're saying. And I think in some ways this taps into one of what I hope is sort of like bigger points of the book, or one of the things that comes out of the book, right? Like oftentimes we, sort of ask about the presence or absence of an identity to try to understand like how it applies to people's politics, right? And so we ask, is this person Black? Yes, no. If yes, I can tell you what their politics are going to be like. Or is this person poor? Yes, no. If yes, I can tell you what their politics are going to be like or what they should be like. What I found was that in some ways, it's a lot more important to ask, what does this identity mean to you, right? Like, what does it mean to be Black? And the thing is that, for Blackness doesn't have the same meaning for all Black people, right? And that variation is important to pay attention to, because that's the variation in the meanings that people attach to Blackness, are connected to the importance that people attach to Blackness. And so if we can, attend to that variation, we actually might get more depth and insight into how race informs politics. And I suspect the same kind of thing is happening right now for working class people, right? And so that same insight that I, talk about in this book of like, it's important to know the meaning that Black people attach to Blackness, I think also transcends to class, right? Like, so right now, I think it's actually really important to have a sense of what does it mean to working class white folks to be working class, right? Like, what kind of meanings do they attach to their class identity? I suspect a lot of those meanings are actually kind of racialized, which is how you end up with, you know, white working class people saying, I'm going to support a party that gives, you know, tax cuts to billionaires and not to me, right? And so it's not enough to just know, like, are you in this group? But I think it's important to know, like, what does membership in that group mean to you? I mean, I don't know. That also might just be random.
No. So, you know, I'm just curious, right, to know your thoughts. And we've been seeing, this whole situation with Kanye West going in the headlines for a while now, especially Kanye and his relationship with Donald Trump. And of course, wearing the MAGA hat, and as of recent too, you know, there was this conference in, you know, I think it was D.C., right, or a bunch of, I think it was a Republican conference. There's a lot of Black Republicans there. I've seen a lot of pictures all over social media. A lot of Black Republicans wearing the MAGA hat. And
right. Be cautious of those pictures though, because like a lot of that is sort of staged. I mean, well, it's all staged, right? But like when I would go to these things, what I was always struck by was the extent to which, you know, a conference on Black Republicanism or a conference on race in the Republican Party that was seemingly thrown by like a Black organization. When you show up there, the crowd is like 95% white, you know? So yeah, no, that was like regular, right? In fact, it was rare that I would go to a Black Republican event that would just be Black Republicans. So again, this gets back to the question of who's the audience for these things. But I think, you sort of this issue of like, what's happening right now. Right. So to me, what's been striking is the way the face of Black Republicanism has evolved so quickly, right, with the Trump presidency. And this, you know, now I'm sort of like peddling my own, or I guess drinking my own Kool-Aid, so to speak. Because I would sort of say this is consistent with what I find, that, right, like your Black Republicans are going to be a reflection of the white gatekeepers. And as like the leaders of the Republican Party change, the Black Republicans are going to sort of morph to look more in line with what party leadership is up to, right? So it's no surprise to me that Kanye West and Diamond and Silk and Candace Owens, who are really good at cultivating celebrity, right, or leveraging celebrity, are becoming, you know, the face of Black Republicanism in 2018, partly because the face of the Republican Party in 2018 is about sort of cultivating celebrity and like sort of cult of personality kind of stuff, right? So, you know, one way to think about this is, you know, the Republican Party gets the Black Republicans it deserves, right? And so, like, the Black Republicans tell you as much about what's happening in the Republican Party writ large as they do about what's happening in Black communities. In fact, I think Black Republicans tell you more about what's happening in the Republican Party writ large than they do about what's happening in Black communities.
So do you think that, because a lot of times, again, especially from the, I guess, president's office, when we see people like Kanye and others, and then Trump embrace them, and then it's always usually followed by the rhetoric that this is helping him with the Black vote, or gaining, you know, or getting more Blacks according to the polls and stuff like that. Do you think there's truth to that? Is this working? Is it helping Trump in his approval of Black Americans? By
I mean, all the polling data, all the polling data I've seen suggests no, it's not, you know. And because partly it's, you know, I mean, I think oftentimes in the rhetoric around Black partisanship, you know, there's this narrative of like all Black people just like do the same thing, and you see this now, right? This sort of the Kanye West stuff, right? It's like, break out of the plantation and don't just think like they tell you, right? And it seems striking to me that you would build an outreach to a group where the basis of it was essentially insulting them, right? And like saying, you just don't get it. Why are you being a lemming? Don't be so stupid, right? That seems like, I mean, granted, maybe, I spent too much time in advertising and I just think about everything from a marketing perspective, but that seems like a weird way to market to people, is to say, like, you're an idiot. Do what I say. Especially if, like, your message is you're an idiot because you just do what other people say, right? It's also the fact that, that's empirically a questionable position, right? Like, it seems like, Black people could certainly be, sitting down with a pencil and paper, rationally calculating their interests and what votes make sense, and you would still end up with as many Black people voting for Democrats as they do now, right? So and this is something I did take away from, the research, and a lot of the time I spent with these race-conscious Black Republicans, where, their message was, the problem isn't Black people, the problem is the party, right? And if the party wanted to talk about its policies in a way that, linked them to the stuff that Black people cared about, or if the party wanted to, shift its policy position so that they were more in line with what, Black voters were interested in, then I think you would see, there's a potential for some movement, maybe. But the current strategy seems to be like, we're going to keep doing the same thing, but, have a celebrity face. Well, I don't see that making, much inroad, right? And in fact, it seems like, it's having the opposite effect, if anything. So I don't necessarily think, Kanye West going to the White House is going to prove to be this watershed moment in regards to Black partisanship. I think, the Republican Party is probably going to have to wrestle very deeply with, how it manages to build winning coalitions, right? And as part of that, they're going to, at some point, have to consider, reaching out to minority voters. Though you can argue that they can take an alternative strategy and just work to disenfranchise those voters, right? But something has to give, right? And I don't think that give is going to be about, Kanye West or Omarosa.
Oh, Lord.
And I guess Omarosa's back on, like, the other side now, so who knows?
No comment.
I love that. People are at the gate like, you can't come back, Omarosa. Sorry.
So yeah, it's interesting to see. Yeah, I don't see a Black wave coming in the Republican Party anytime soon. And it's interesting that you talked about them needing to, like, strategize and think about coalition building, because they actually, the Republican Party did this really large report. I think it was in like 2012 or 2013 about how they really need to, like, come along with the times, and need to focus on, like, other, like, demographics that are, like, growing, and how they need to reach out to these people. They need to get rid of some of this rhetoric. You can probably find it on, like, the RNC website. And
definitely. Yeah, I think, and those kind of things come up with some regularity, right? So, and this is one of the dynamics where it's like, there certainly are people within the party who have been, beating this drum for a while. And like I said, the majority of the activists I talk to, right, are what I would call race conscious, right? They're the very people sort of trying to spread this message within the party, right, that something has to happen. But despite the, presence of this knowledge and these reports, right, like, it never manages to get traction, partly because, important constituencies within the party are just not, interested, right? And it's not just, like, Black voters, right? I mean, I think probably a more pressing threat is, like, Latino voters. So you're right. There has been, efforts to acknowledge, right, like, the importance of increasing diversity in the country and how that's going to affect political strategies. But a fair amount of that, is, I don't want to put words in people's mouths, but, like, sort of a little bit of lip service more than anything, right? Because this is, and in some ways, what you're saying taps into the, I don't know if it's so much power of Black Republicans within the party, but certainly the opportunities for Black Republicans within the party, right? Is that even the Republican Party, right, has to engage in some performance of inclusion, right? So, like, and if it's only performance, I guess, you know, all the better for some folks in the party. But the fact that there is even like a desire to have Black faces around creates an opportunity for Black Republicans, right? But the thing is, like, if you want to be that Black face around, you have to talk about Blackness in a way that fits comfortably with what white people in the party want to hear.
Yeah, not surprised by that.
I mean, you know, to be fair, I mean, well, and not that it's not unfair, actually, what I just said, but we can also think about how this dynamic plays out in a lot of different institutions and organizations, right? We can think about corporations, we can think about universities, we can certainly think about, like, the Democratic Party, right? Could a Black leader in the Democratic Party talk about Blackness in a way that, like, made white leaders in the Democratic Party uncomfortable? I mean, I suspect probably yes, like, Blacks have more power within the Democratic Party, but there's probably, you know, parameters around that. So, you know, I definitely think, you know, what I'm saying is, like, certainly applies to the Republican Party, but I think, you know, many institutions in the United States can be called to the mat for, you know, white people trying to manage how Black people talk about Blackness.
I absolutely agree. I absolutely agree. And that's why we have BHD, so we can say what we want to say.
No, and it's interesting. I mean, because, like, even, you know, within the context of Black Republicans, right? Like, they're often, you know, when Black Republicans had spaces where it was just them and they got to sort of be Black, not under the watchful eye of white people, it was a very different vibe compared to these meetings I would go to when it was, like, mostly white people, and then, like, Black Republicans were on the panel, but the audience was all white. So there's certainly something too, right? Being able to have a space where you get to just be Black and not have to worry about managing your Blackness for white audiences.
So, you know, I think we've covered a lot here talking about, you know, Black Republicans and your book, and I know our listeners got a lot out of it, and I'm sure people will be trying to look for what work you have forthcoming in the future. So, you know, what recent or upcoming projects are you working on and maybe releasing in the near future?
Yeah, so my next project in some ways builds off some of the insights from the Black Republican work and some of the stuff actually we were just talking about, right? Like being Black in white spaces and how that's different from, like, being Black in Black spaces. So my next project is going to be a study of Black professionals, specifically Black advertising professionals. So it's going to be a study of what it's like to be Black in advertising. I guess if you think about the Black Republican book as what it's like to be Black in the Republican Party, the new project is like, what's it like to be Black in corporate America? And specifically thinking about sort of what happens when who you are and what you do overlap, right? When part of your job is bringing to bear insights around Black consumers, Black markets, how does that affect your relationship to Blackness? But then also, how does having Black folks in corporate America work to alter perceptions around Blacks as a group? So that's a new project. So if any of your listeners are in corporate America, in advertising, and want to talk, they should give me a shout out. You can find me on the Georgetown website or hit me up on Twitter. I am about to get out and about and do the thing on the new project. So
yeah, we need that. And it's funny because that leads right into the next question where I was about to ask, where can people reach you? You said you're on Twitter. What's your handle?
Oh, yeah. So it's Corey D. Fields, CoreyDFields. At Corey D. Fields on Twitter, or actually, I have my own podcast with my colleague Leslie Hinkson from Georgetown, and that's B-Side _podcast. So if you're interested in Black sociology stuff, you can give that a listen.
Oh, nice.
But yeah, so that's how you can sort of reach out if you like.
Okay. And it's funny because I was going to ask you about that. When I went to your Twitter page, I saw the podcast and I was like, yo, that's cool. We'll definitely include a link to that. You can definitely slide in Dr. Field's DMs if you want to be a part of that study.
Please.
Yeah, I'm interested in that too, just for the simple fact, all the times we see all these failed advertising campaigns and you always hear to say, like, do they have anybody black, on
Right.
And just knowing how, or
And
if they did, how do the black advertisers feel in that space when these campaigns are clearly crashing and failing, trying to reach the black demographic too.
Exactly. So this is it. You tapped into exactly the kind of things I'm going to be exploring with this project.
Oh, well, sounds interesting. I'll be on the lookout for sure.
Yeah, so exciting. Well, thank you for taking time out of your busy schedule to talk with us. It was a very, very good conversation. We want our listeners to cop the book. We will include a link to that. Check out the podcast, check out the Twitter account, all of that. Yeah.
Yes, and thanks for having me on. Yeah, I love what you guys are doing. Happy to be here. Hopefully I'll do something interesting enough to get an invite back.
Oh, for
yes,
sure.
for sure. All righty.
All right. Take care.
Thanks.
All right, Daph, so what do you think about Dr. Fields and his work on the black elephants in the room?
I thought the conversation and the book was just so very timely. I also think it's interesting that he wrote this book before like this black MAGA Trump explosion or, the current movement to try to push Black people into the Republican Party. And so it's interesting that he did this like really in-depth field work and had like such great insights into, the dynamics of what's happening with everybody, Black Republicans, white Republicans, and everything in between. So I thought it was really interesting conversation and a lot to unpack.
Yeah, no, for sure. I mean, perfect timing with everything going on in the political atmosphere now and today, with more discussion of Black Republicans, mainly because of these celebrities' faces, being seen with Trump, which is probably more so than in the past. It's usually just been what you've seen on like Fox News and those Black Republican or conservative political commentators. But now because we're seeing people see celebrities, I think those conversations are infiltrating the general public a little bit more than it has in the past. So it was good getting somebody, who has studied this, written a book about it, to come, drop some knowledge on what it's really like and for the Black Republicans in this country.
Mm-hmm. I appreciated his comment about how staged some of these events are and how when you go to them, a large part of the audience or a large proportion of the audience is white. And so I saw, it's not like I was worried or anything, but I saw these pictures and these live streams with all of these, Black people in their Make America Great Again hats. And I'm like, yo, it looks like a movement. And it seems like it's always there have always been these people that are at these conferences, but like you said, it's the celebrities that are now, making it cool. And I just hope some other people, just don't fall for the media rhetoric and BS around this so-called right-wing Black Republican movement.
Mm-hmm. And it's funny because I remember, with the conference going on, I know you sent me some pictures. Some other people tagged me on social media as well when it was going on. And so I was like, perusing through like the web, the social media accounts and stuff. And even with like the Black Republican ones, it was funny because, you would see like those pictures that were getting viral and everybody was seeing them with just like a group of Black folk wearing MAGA hats and whatever else. But then when I would see like pictures of like the entire conference or, what was going on, it was way more white folk there when it was like a group. You saw the Black folks scattered around. So it's like, so people were taking like those pictures of like, a lot of the Black folk and just like, parading around like, look, we're here, wearing MAGA hats and picture with Kanye and other folks. So you got to be careful of like what is being shown to you and not overgeneralize to the extent like it is like this massive movement and it's growing over time. Like Dr. Fields said, that really is just not the case of like increased support for the Republican Party. And I probably actually think it's the opposite, to be honest, more so.
Yeah. But speaking of not generalizing, and it's something that we often like to do when we see Black Republicans, partly because of who the media kind of elevates, the voices that they elevate. But I just really appreciated him kind of complicating the narrative around who are Black Republicans. So you have the all lives matter Black Republicans, and you have the Black Lives Matter Black Republicans. And you know, I can't be too hard on the Black Lives Matter ones who are trying to change the party. Who, you know, he made a comment that was like, so, you know, Republican is like the small government, and how that potentially translates into like this belief that like, okay, if we have smaller government, we have like less, you know, interference and interaction with the state that might be prejudiced or, you know, racist against us. He didn't exactly say those words, but, you know, it kind of got my brain like rolling. I was like, yo, had not thought about, I don't agree, but I had not thought about that.
Yeah. Yeah, no, it's true. I think a lot of what he talked about, you know, isn't because it's something I'm going to have to work on, you know, because yes, one of the first things that come to mind when somebody says Black Republican, you know what I'm thinking, right? Like, that, like you said, like one of the questions, the Uncle Tom trope, and like, are you serious? How could you, you know, especially more so in this day and age with Trump. I think it just exacerbates those feelings even more. But no, I think, you know, like he said, there is a group of Black Republicans who are pushing to make the Republican Party more, like he said, more hospitable to Black folks. And I think there's something that I think that's a good thing, you know, to push. Hey, because right now it feels like the Black agenda doesn't care at all about Black folks. I mean, the Republican Party doesn't care at all about Black folks. And so it's like, if we have people in there, if they feel that way and they do care about the party, but they want Black needs to be a part of the agenda, then that should happen. Because I also don't feel comfortable on the flip side that how sometimes it feels for the liberals and Democrats, how comfortable they are with just knowing that they're always going to get the Black vote, right? And just relying on that. And that's also not fair, even though politically they seem to cater to towards our interests way more than Republicans. But at the same time, if they just always know they're going to get our votes, and they can always just have that lip service. And if Republicans start to show, who knows when that will be or how that will look like, but, you know, maybe just tweak their message or do some things for the Black community, be on the same board. Because a lot of the stuff is just about being a human, right? And just having the proper civil rights and all that kind of stuff, all things we're pushing for. And I know there's Republicans that support that, you know. I don't think it's as polarized as we like the media likes to make it seem. When it comes to police brutality, who wants police brutality, right? Like, who wants to support that, Republican or Democrat, you know? And I know there's Republicans who are against police brutality. And so we just need to kind of hear or see more of those. But like you said, because of those gatekeepers, we get them all lives matter Black folk, Republicans.
Yeah, gatekeepers. Yeah, because I'm tired of seeing cubic zirconia and rayon on my TV. That's diamond. I don't want to see them. They had a documentary that came out about Black Republicans a couple of weeks ago. I'm like, I don't want them on my screen. I do have a question for you. Okay, so do you think Omarosa is a All Lives Matter or Black Lives Matter Republican?
I think she just an Omarosa Lives Matter. That's all she is. But she be flip flopping like crazy, man. Whoever paying her and putting money in her pockets, that's what she at. You know, She just too funny. She's so obvious with that too.
What about Kanye? Black Lives or All Lives?
Again, it's funny because both of those same reaction. Kanye Lives Matter. You know, same thing. That's it. Nobody else matters as far as what they do in their perspective.
So I feel like some of the loudest, like Black Republicans in this movement, or that worked for like the administration, are trying to prop them up. They are actually, I think, just concerned with like gaining fame. And because I know, like, for real, Ty, it could be very lucrative if me and you were to like come out and be like, oh yeah, Republicans are all of that. Like, just think about how fast we would go viral and go on. We'd be on Fox News every week.
The come up.
That's a come up. And it's kind of like, if you're willing to sell your soul.
Put on a MAGA hat with BHD shirt.
Yo, when I tell you, child, we would be famous.
Oh my goodness. That'd be too funny. Yeah, get them podcast numbers way up, boy.
For all the wrong reasons.
No, that's not what we stand for. You wouldn't catch me doing that, man. Not catching me. That's funny. But even as he was talking, I was thinking about, like, you know, I've seen shows recently begin to tackle this subject matter more. I don't remember. I know it was like 2 or 3 shows. I know one was like an episode of Blackish where Junior was like running for like, or becoming like a part of Black Republican Club party or something in his school. And, you know, of course, you know, his parents had an issue with that. And I want to say if it was like an episode of Atlanta or something similar along those lines, maybe not Atlanta, where they were like talking to a Black family who were Black Republicans, but, you know, they went in there ready to go in on them. But a lot of their perspectives, they shared a lot of the similar interests, but it was more about being more fiscally conservative for them, but they were still socially liberal in a lot of ways. And that confused, you know, the liberals who were going over there, like to think they were going to get into this big debate. So even with shows like that, I think they're good. It's good as doing, because it's showing that, hey, like within the Black Republicans that are Black, there's many of them who still care about the same issues we do. It's just that we never get to see them.
Yeah. But I just say Junior lost. Anyway, he lost in a lot of ways. So
especially in this season, man.
But yeah, so this was a good conversation.
Very good conversation.
And I want to talk more. Oh, you know what? We got to get the link to those books or those authors where people can get a little bit more history and insight into the Black Republican Party, you know, pre-1930s. We're going to put those up. Yeah,
put those up. Maybe we even try to reach out to 1 or 2 of those authors too and see if they want to come chat.
Yes. Because we got to do the education, y'all. You know. History is important because it, you know, helps us learn. And my biggest thing is you don't have to be, you know, stagnant. You don't have to stay somewhere, even if you're being treated wrong. And I know that's how a lot of people are feeling now about the Democratic Party. But what I will say is you have to be strategic. You know what I'm saying? You cannot burn the house down, you know, just because the microwave or the refrigerator needs fixing. Like, no, you can fix those things without like just trashing the whole kitchen or burning the whole house down. And that's kind of how I feel about things. You are not going to find me voting for no Trump. How could you? How could you?
Republicans got a long way before stealing my vote, you know, a long way. But it's not that I would, you know, be never open to it. But I don't think we're close to that yet. But yeah, I agree. Even with just Democrats, people, they, you know, they're not perfect and they need to do more. And, you know, we can hold them accountable, but it does not mean that you, 1, run all the way to the other side, or 2, you don't vote at all. And then we all, you know, SOL, because like Trump up here. Anyway. All right. So great conversation. I want to thank Dr. Fields for coming in, chatting with us again. We'll be paying attention to his future work. As always, you know, follow us on social media at BHD Podcast on Twitter, Instagram, and Facebook. Review us on iTunes, rate us on iTunes if you haven't, okay? As well, go to our website, www.blackandhighlydangerous.com, to follow and keep up with our latest content. Email us at bhdpodcast@gmail.com if you have ideas or you want to be a part of the podcast. Remember, we do our listener guest episode at the end of every month. We're serious about that. So come on, email us, contact us, and we'll bring you on to talk about whatever your expertise in and the current events for that month as well. And continue to wear your shirts and your hoodies and all that stuff. All of you have been posting it, and we've been sharing it on our social media. So we really appreciate all the support. The link still works if you want to still buy some more shirts. People have still been doing it and then posting it. So go ahead and continue to support. And all those proceeds are still going to United Negro College Fund. So, you know, keep doing it. And we appreciate all the support. And eventually, once we collect them all, I'll definitely put them up on the website. But they definitely have been going up immediately on on Instagram and stuff like that. So go check it out if you haven't seen it already. And as always, share us with your friends, share us with your family, and share us with your enemies, and continue to be the oppressor's worst fear.
And Black Republicans too. If you're interested in continuing this and other conversations, visit our website, blackandhighlydangerous.com, to subscribe to our email list, suggest topics, and participate in our discussion forums.
Follow us on Twitter, Instagram, and Facebook at BHD Podcast. And please don't forget to subscribe and rate our podcast on your favorite platform. And as always, continue to be the oppressor's worst fear.